In this video, I'm going to walk through the Microsoft Learn Lab for Azure to be able to host a web application with the Azure Web App Service. Now, in order to get to these labs, first I want to talk about that. So we'll actually open up over here, and I'm at a website called docs.microsoft.com /ENUS Learn. ENUS meaning for English, and then Learn. And what this is this is a website that allows us access to lots of Microsoft labs that help us to learn. And the great thing about this is it's all free, so we can go ahead and take advantage of them. One caveat I'll note with that, since they are free, sometimes you get what you pay for. Sometimes these labs will be unavailable. Sometimes these labs will be broken. Part of that, we just have to deal with. Part of it, as far as maybe the labs being broken or the instructions not being fully up to date, well, that's kind of what we're working with in the world of the cloud, is that things change and things update, and therefore the instructions may not always be correct. So it's kind of up to us to be able to figure out where the instructions differ and allow it to catch back up. So as you can see, it already recognizes me. I've gone ahead and I've logged in. To be able to use these labs, you do actually have to have a Microsoft account. If you are at Green River, like I am, your school email already has or can log right in with that. Otherwise, you can go ahead and create an account. Most Hotmail or MSN accounts automatically will work here, as well as third-party like Gmail accounts you can set up in here as well. So there are some preferred or some suggested options for you to choose from here. I don't want to choose from those. I want to go right here where it says Learning Paths, Learn on Your Own, and click Browse All Learning Options. Under the Browse All here, I can filter by product, I can filter by roles, I can filter by levels and type. Really what I want to do, however, is I want to look for a specific lab, and so I'm going to do that here under the search option. And again, the search I'm looking for is host a web application. If I spell it right, hit the right keys, and hit enter, and it will go ahead and it will filter down based on the name that I've started writing there. And there is the module that I want to do, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and it starts me off. So it starts by giving me a little bit of detail about this lab. I'm going to go ahead and go to the introduction. On the introduction, it talks about why you might be able to do this, what the objectives or the purpose of this is, and any prerequisites. Go ahead and say next. Then talks about a web app in Azure. Why would we do this? What is an app service? What is an application as far as Azure is concerned? Talks about deployment slots, some continuous integration and continuous deployment, integration into Visual Studio and other publishing methods, auto scaling options, and then talks about the actual process of creating a web app. If this is your first time here, I highly suggest for you to read all of this. Some of these components that it was just mentioned cannot actually be done in this lab. They restrict what our flexibility is simply because people exploited it in the past and used it for non-learning purposes. So some of the features, such as built-in auto scale support, is a great feature in Azure, but we can't do it in our labs. We're simply restricted to what our lab instructions say. So let's go ahead and click next, and it will start us on the exercise. First thing it will do is it will say, hey, you need a sandbox. If this doesn't come up for you, it may actually be saying, hey, you need to log in before you can start a sandbox. In that case, go ahead and log in, create a Microsoft account if necessary, or log in with an existing account, and then say activate sandbox. This will take a couple of seconds. You may have to review and grant permissions for it to create the sandbox on your behalf. Accept. There we go. And now it should be building out a sandbox for me to be able to connect to. The sandbox while it's building is kind of that idea right there. It is a sandbox. It is kind of like a child would have a sandbox that they can go and they can play in. They go, they build something. When they're done building their sandcastle or whatever they were building, they smash it, and then they smash it to nothing, and then they rebuild it from the ground back up. And it's literally just that. It is a play area where we as systems engineers or administrators can go build something, see how it works, and then when we're done, just destroy it. All right, sandbox activated. In this case, I have nearly 4 hours in order to complete this. When those 4 hours are done, everything I've created in here will be deleted. Awesome. Also tells me I've used 1 out of 10 sandboxes. This is simply something that Microsoft has had to do as far as limiting people so they don't get exploited from nefarious purposes. If I run out of sandboxes, I can create more tomorrow. All right, next, choose your development language. These instructions will change depending on which development language I choose. I'm going to leave it as C#. If I was familiar with Java or Node.js or Python, as familiar as I am with C#, then I could choose one of those. However, I will stay with C#. One, because I personally am somewhat familiar with it, and two, that's the default option. All right, so create a web app. It tells me to go ahead and sign into the Azure portal using the same account I created the sandbox with. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this link. I'm going to say open a new tab. And this should log me right in. And there's a couple of things I want to verify here as it finalizes its load up. First off, up here in the upper right hand corner, it has my email address. Great. So that means I'm actually logged into there with that account. I have a work email. I have a personal email. I want to make sure I'm logged in with my work, not my personal email account. The second thing is this right here. It says I'm logged into the Microsoft Learn Sandbox environment, which means that is who's paying for the activities I'm about to do. So Microsoft Learn will actually pay Microsoft for the activities that I'm going to do. I'm going to build up a server and Microsoft will foot the bill for that. If it says anything other than Microsoft Learn Sandbox, then that means I personally might be having to pay for this, and therefore I want to make sure I change that. If those don't look right, you can come up here where the name is and click on that. You can sign in with a different account. So if the name overall or the email overall is wrong, I could choose that. If the second part, where it says Microsoft Learn Sandbox, says something else, I say switch directory, which allows me to choose a different person who's going to be paying for my activity. All right. So I'm logged in. Back to the instructions. It says on the Azure portal, go to home, select create resource. All right, so I'm on the home page. Say create resource. Actually, I'm going to put the instructions on a different window here. You won't see them, but I will walk along for it. Okay, so it takes me to the Azure Marketplace. From here, I can choose all the various classifications of resources I want. So for instance, I'm creating a web page, so I may come down here to web, and then I choose the specific application I'm looking for. There is the getting started, which are the most popular services I'm looking for. If I was just looking for a virtual server, I would come under compute and create a virtual machine and various service types here. Let's see, the instructions are telling me to choose web and then web app. So I'll come back down here, web and web app. There we go. So it starts off creating a web app, the web app creation wizard. And so we have lots of different fields here. The first off, subscription. Again, this is the person who is paying for this service. In this case, when I click on it, and you see I only have the one option down here, the concierge subscription. That's perfectly fine. A lot of companies you go into will have only one subscription, and therefore you would leave that exactly the same anyways. The next is the resource group. A resource group is in general a group of permissions. So if you have a largish organization, you may give some resources to the IT department, some resources to the sales department, some resources to HR. And what you would do is you would create a resource group for each of those departments so that they then have different permissions to those resources. Because I'm working in the Microsoft Learn sandbox, that resource group has already been created for me, so I choose that. If this was my own private environment, I could click Create New to create a new resource group and then name it something more appropriate than simply Learn-1 a BADB123. I could actually name this HR or Sales or Marketing or whatever I wanted it to be. All right, a web app name. Now this web app name does have to be unique. You can see it will automatically include the .azurewebsites.net. So I need to type in a name that will be unique on the azurewebsites.net site. For instance, if I simply type test, it tells me there's already a test.azurewebsites.net, and I could actually confirm that, test.azurewebsites.net, and I will go to somebody's test page, which is broken. But it is at least claimed by somebody. So I want to go ahead and take this. I want to create an instance here. What I'm going to do, something I learned a long time ago, is I'm going to use my initials. Because I want my environment to be unique, I still want to call it test, but I want it to be unique. So I'm going to do an ECG_test. Can't use underscore, ECG-test. And so this is what you might do in a company. Say if I worked for company abc.com, then I would do an abc-webapp1 or abc-domain controller or something like that, just to keep the naming schemes consistent. Under publish, do I want to publish code or a Docker container? In this case, I want to publish code. And I know that simply because my instructions are telling me that. And if you know what the difference between a Docker container versus simply code is, then that will help you understand that as well. The runtime stack, what type of runtime am I using? And this is where that prior choice of, do I want C#, do I want Python, do I want Node.js comes in. Because I'm chose C#, I want to choose, let's see, it's telling me .NET Core 3.1, so that guy right there. And then operating system, my instructions are telling me Linux. Linux versus Windows, in this case, really probably doesn't matter, but the instructions are telling me Linux, so that's what I'm staying with. Region. Where do I want this physically located in the world? Now there's lots of different regions that I can choose. Let's see, Australia is my very first option. Canada, Central US, East Asia, France, North US, West US. Lots of different physical locations. In general, the rule of thumb is to put this closest to the person who's going to be using it. So if this was going to be used by somebody on the East Coast, I would want to find a server on the East Coast. If this was going to be used by somebody in Asia, I would want to find a server in Asia somewhere. Same thing with Europe. You would normally want that to be the closest to the destination. In this case, I will leave it to Central US because 1, that was the default, and 2, the instructions tell me to. All right, and then app service plan. This is basically the features and cost that is associated with this website that I'm building out. So we're calling this a website, but it is actually building out a server with a web application on top of it, with a website running on it. So in this case, it would be Apache or Nginx that is running on top of Linux. And so this is where I specify the server size and server capabilities. So first off, which plan am I using? Well, I have to it tells me I have to create a new one because I don't have an existing one. If I look down here, it says new. I have to create a new one. In theory, I could say create new and give it a different name. I'm just going to leave it like that. As far as the SKU size, it tries to give me a premium V2 P1 2V, which has 3.5 gigs of RAM and 210 ACU. That could mean a lot of things. That's pretty high end. I don't need that, especially for this test lab, and especially because my instructions tell me to choose something different. So I'm going to say change size. And this is where we can choose our specs. We see by default P1 V2 210 ACU compute units, 3.5 gigs of RAM, a specific type of a virtual machine that's being created, and then an estimated $81 per month. We can go higher. We can go up to the P2 V2 or the P3 V2, all with their estimated costs and capabilities. And we can see the various included features down below: custom domains, auto scaling, staging slots, and traffic manager. And then the included hardware, the Azure compute units, the RAM, and then the actual disk storage that goes along with that. Let's see, we could go higher. We can choose an isolated type server. So an I1, I2, I3. As we go through this, you'll actually see some of those options down below. No, they don't change. If I go back to production versus the isolated, you'll notice that the included features change because isolated has features that the production doesn't. Additionally, there is a dev test category. Up here we have an F1 and a B1 option. F1, it is free, which is probably why the instructions are telling me to do the F1 size. You will notice down here under the included features, there are no features listed here, as opposed to back when we were in the production clear environment where we could choose custom domains. So for instance, if I wanted to create a bobsshoestore.com website, I could not come over to the free section because I can't choose a domain for that. I have to stay with the azurewebsites.net domain. Additionally, autoscale is an option for the production site, but it's not for the free. Basically, I get one server and only one server. I cannot scale up or scale down the size of that server. Same thing with staging slots. I cannot have multiple stages or slots for deployments. No backups are included in the free section, and traffic manager is not available in the free section either. But it is still free, and if I'm simply working in a test or dev environment, this may be sufficient for my needs. We can see there is actually a B1 option, which is the very basic version that we can run on here. It does include some custom domains, and you can manually scale it up to 3 instances. However, in this case, the instructions tell us to say leave it at F1. That's what I'm going to stay with. So I will say apply. And we're now down at the bottom of the page. It gives me some options. Let's see. Look back at the instructions really quick. The instructions tell me review and create. I'm actually going to click next for monitoring just to show what it is. Monitoring, there are some monitoring options that we could throw in here. If this wasn't an F1 size, we could say yes, and it will enable some application insights that will help build monitoring code into our application. Next, we can go into tags. Now, tags are just that. It's just a tag that you would put into an application or a server or a service that can then help us find things later. For instance, under name, we could choose department. And then under value, we call this, I don't know, IT, or whatever our department would be. The idea of the tags is that you create this department tag in your entire environment on all the devices, and then later you can actually search for, hey, show me all the devices that are in the IT department. Or you could put in a billing code or a physical location or who created this, and then you can search for those resources at a later date. Finally, we get to the review and create. We can see all the details we've specified here. Before I click create, there is an option here for download template. So if I think I might be doing this multiple times, I could actually download this template and I could automate the install. I won't be doing that here. I will just simply click create, and we can see in the upper right hand corner, it is starting the deployment. So this can take a couple of minutes. Basically, what's happening, oh, that went away. If I click on the little bell icon here, we can see the deployment is still in progress. What is happening if this was a full-blown non-free environment is it is creating a virtual machine. In that virtual machine, it is installing the operating system, or more specifically, cloning the operating system from another computer. It is then booting up that operating system and then installing a web server on top of it and configuring the web server based on our configurations. Because this was a free version, it actually kind of just jumped to the last step of configuring the web server because there was a already existing shared web server that we're using. A couple of options. I could say pin to dashboard, so that will pin it to my front dashboard page and always be available for me. I could click go to resource. In fact, I'll do that, which will take me straight to the web application that I just created. Or if I go back to home and I click on all resources, then this will show me all the resources that are associated with my account, and I should be able to see the web application there. Should be able to, anyways. Try that one more time. All right, that's not liking me. Let's see if I can click back. There we go. All right, so I clicked back. Sometimes the portal just runs a little slow, and that's fine normally. All right, so we are at the application service, and we can see that right there. That is the app service. If I had gone to the all resources, we would have actually seen two lines items in there, the app service that we're looking at right now, and then the app service plan. Very briefly, the app service plan is basically the virtual machine that you're paying for, and then the app service is one of the applications on that machine. So if you think about a business computer, you pay for the business computer, and then you may have multiple applications such as Office or Visio, or some picture editing or games. You may have multiple applications on them. That's how it kind of separates out. The app service plan would be the physical computer, and then the app service would be the various applications on top of it. Okay, so very briefly, here on our overview page, we have various information. We've got our resource group. Again, if I had been able to name this, I would have called this IT, or I might have called this test environment, or EDS test environment, or HR, or something more applicable. We see the status is running. Yes, it's powered on, it's running, it is working. Where is it physically? It's in the central US. Who's paying for it? Thankfully, somebody else. Similarly, what's the subscription ID? That is just simply the technical ID of this name right there. What is the URL for this website? Well, it's that right there. In fact, if I click on it, it opens up in a new tab, and it's going to show me First time always takes a little while, but it will actually show me a sample web page. App service plan. I may have multiple app service plans in my environment. There's the one that this application is on. I can actually move it. Once I've set up this app service at one point, I can move it to a different plan. So I can set it up on the free section, and then once it's working, move it over to a paid environment. If I need to FTP into it, those are my FTP credentials right there. Oh, there we go. There's my test website. All right. So that was our first step as far as the instructions. If you're following along, that was creating the web application. Scroll on down, and we saw the sample page. And then we can actually check this, click this check your work option. Yay! It actually looked into our Azure environment and said, yes, you did actually create this website. That's perfect. And then continue. All right, so now when we click continue, it takes us to a slightly different web page, which allows us to write some code. Now, if you've never written code before, that's fine. This walks you through step by step everything that's necessary. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger. All right, so the way that this page is laid out is on the left-hand side here we have our instructions. On the right-hand side here we have our Azure Cloud Shell. Now we don't actually have to use this shell that we're seeing. If we go back into Azure, there is this button right up here, which is our Azure Cloud Shell as well. So I could click on that and that opens it up. And that's exactly the same thing as what's in our instructions. It's a little bit easier to use the one that's in the instructions because we have the instructions on the left and the Cloud Shell on the right. If you were doing this outside of the lab instructions, then you would actually open up this Cloud Shell yourself and be typing the commands from there. All right, so we're continuing on development language. I started with C#, so that's what I'm staying with. And we start with a new web project. All right, so with this, we're going to be using some .NET commands. And these may be, some of the commands that we use here may be kind of questionable. Pretty much just follow along. I'll try to explain them as we go. All right, so first off, our Cloud Shell here is a Linux environment and we need to install .NET on it. And that's what these commands down here do. We can see that it says that this is a bash command. And what we want to do basically is just copy all of this into this. A couple of different things we can do with this. We can highlight it all, right click, copy, and then come over here, right click, paste. Or we can just simply click this copy button right here. Get a little check mark. Yeah, it copied. And then come over here and right click, paste. Paste or placed as plain text, either way. So this is going to download the .NET runtime onto this Cloud Shell environment and install it and configure it. Yes. All right, so I copied it and it copied everything up to there. There's no carriage return at the end of this line. Therefore, we ended at that line right there. I manually have to hit enter. That's fine. Just gotta maybe look at what I'm doing before I move on to the next step. All right, so that installed .NET. Pretty quick, pretty easy. Next is we want to create a new ASP.NET MVC application. MVC, Model View Control. Basically, it's a way of creating web applications. But we want to create it, and we want to create one called Best Bike App. And we do it with this command right here. So copy, paste. Again, if this part doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense to you, well, this is kind of coding. Really, the important part here is understanding, reading the instructions and understanding them enough in order to follow them properly. All right, so this created a new folder called Best Bike App. And if you're familiar with Linux, which this environment is running in, you can use the ls command in order to get a listing of all the files there. And we'll see there is actually a folder here called Best Bike App. And so it says we need to cd into Best Bike App, cd, change directory. I'm not going to copy that. I'm just going to do it myself. cd into the Best Bike App, and now if I do an ls, I see that there's lots of files in there, and it says I need to do a .NET run, which is another Microsoft .NET command, which helps prepare the files for running in the environment. And it says, yeah, you should get something that looks like this. We'll want to pay attention here. It says that this is a console. This is the console output we should be seeing, as opposed to the bash commands that we're typing. And we look, and yeah, sure, that looks about right. Okay, let's see. It says that's running and we're listening on port 5000. Sure, listening and running on port 5000. I'll agree with that. It gives us a little information. If we were on the local machine that's running this, we could open up a web browser to localhost :5000 and see our application. But we're not on that local machine, so we can't really do that. And really what we're doing right here, this is, I call this baby steps. We created an application. We wanted to make sure it worked. And it did. That was our baby step before we move on. So now we're sure it's working. And it tells us, press Control-C on my keyboard to shut it down. All right, next. Did I? No, okay. I wasn't sure if I'd skipped ahead, but no, that was, I wanted to make sure I only went one page, and I did. All right, so deploying code to the app service, and this is more informational at this point. It talks about how we can deploy. We can use the Azure DevOps environment. We can deploy directly from GitHub, from Bitbucket, from OneDrive, from Dropbox, or we can do a manual deployment using Git, AZ Web App Up, Zip Deploys, Visual Studio, or FTP. It talks about what those different things mean, and then continue. All right, so this takes us back in. Again, it confirms what is our development language. We've started with C#. We definitely don't want to be changing it at this point. All the .NET commands we just ran are all C# dependent. Therefore, if we changed at this point, we would really be breaking things. All right, so it previously talked about, in the prior page, talked about using zip deploy. That's what we're going to be doing. So it says we'll use .NET Publish to build the final application files. So we're actually going to be building a published version of our website. It will be a very, very basic website, but we'll use that anyways. And then we'll zip them up into a zip file. Okay. It does give me a message. Make sure you're in the Best Bike app directory. And I can see right here, I am in the Best Bike app directory. So that's perfectly fine. Then just go ahead and copy and paste. I'm going to follow it up with an enter while we're waiting. Very briefly, .NET Publish. So it uses the .NET command to create a publishment. -O pub. O oftentimes means output. So it's creating a new folder called pub in order for the output. We then cd, change directory, into the pub directory, and then we zip that up into a file called site.zip. Awesome. In fact, if I do an ls right now, there's my site.zip. All right. Finally, perform your deployment with AZ Web App Deploy source config.zip or config-zip. Replace your unique app name in the following command with the Azure Web App you've run. I'm going to do this with help of Notepad. So I'm going to open up Notepad. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all this. I'm going to paste this into Notepad. All right. So right here it says your unique app name, and this is one of the standard conventions you'll see in a lot of technology instructions. A lot of instructions used for applications and various IT environments. You'll see things in these less than, greater than, less than. Excuse me. Less than or greater than symbols. You'll see things inside of these less than, greater than symbols, and oftentimes this means put your content here. Few things I've actually let me copy this. Oops, too much. There we go. So if this is the template, then that means we need to replace this right here, and I mean all of that, with our application name. I believe that is our full website. Does it say with the name of your Azure web app? Okay, so I believe that means our full website. Let's actually look at the, there we go, back to the portal. We can see the Azure web app. It might just be ECG-test. It might just be my server name, service name. I'm going to copy that, come back to my Notepad, and paste that in. Now, one thing I've seen people do, and before I go on, I think that's the right name. It will tell us if it's not. So we'll actually let me typo it in case. Okay, so one thing I have noticed people do, they don't fully understand the less than, greater than, and what they'll do is they'll actually leave the less than, greater than in there. That's wrong. What you do is you replace the less than, greater than, and everything in between them with your response. So instead of that, it should look something like that. By the way, if you're following along, your resource group is going to be different than mine. Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and copy this. Go back to our command here. Now this will fail because I typoed it. So if I go ahead and paste this in, it will fail, and I want to show exactly what it's going to do when it fails. Okay, so it goes ahead and says, yeah, okay, I've got some credentials for deploying this. But then I get an error, resource not found. If I look through this error a little bit more, it says the resource Microsoft Web Sites ECG Test 1 under the resource group was not found. So that tells me one of two things. That means I've either typed the resource name incorrectly, in this case the ECG Test 1 is incorrect, or I typed the resource group name incorrectly. Now I copied the resource group from there. In fact, if I look back in at the portal, I can actually see, well, there's the resource group right there. I could copy that back into my Notepad and then paste it back in, paste the command back in, just to be sure. I also have the name right here, ECG Test. I intentionally wrote ECG Test 1 just to show the error. So I fixed that, copy, back to our command here, and then just simply paste and enter. This time it should work. Gets the credentials, starts the deployment. Yep, got some confirmation for the deployment. There we go. And then finally some results. Let's see, active, true. Author, I never specified an author, so it's NA, same with the email. Did it complete? Yes. Who deployed it? A push deployer. I pushed the deployment. Okay. When did it end? Right there. There's also a comparable start time, which means you could delete one from the other to figure out exactly how long it took. Is this read-only? Yeah. Is this temporary? No. When did it work? Where's the log for it working? Messages, progress, status. All right, basically that says, yeah, it worked. All right, instructions now tell me to go ahead and verify the deployment, which we could do by browsing to the application. So if I go back to my other window, that was my application that I started with. That was the very basic template. If I refresh this, very first time you open up a web application, it can take a couple of seconds. Otherwise, this one worked pretty fast. I see I have a welcome page. I have my application name called Best Bike App. Home, privacy. There we go. So it built the application for me. There could be more in here. There could be a whole lot more in here. However, this lab was not about putting stuff in the web application. This lab was about creating the web application. In theory, if this was a production environment and a web developer, if I was partnered with a web developer and the web developer created a website and they said, here you go, here's the content, we need to go ahead and push this out into our production environment. These are the steps I would take in order to publish that, which is what, as a systems administrator or engineer, I would need to know. But the actual creation of that content is somebody else's job. So we're not too worried about that at this point. All right, lastly, continue. It gives me a summary. It does talk about the cleanup. It says the sandbox will automatically clean up the resources when I finish this module. If I don't finish this module, it will keep going until it times out. So the timeout was about 4 hours, which means the sandbox will keep going for 4 hours with that website up and running. So it seems kind of a waste at this point, but that does also mean that if I'm extremely slow in how I work through these labs, if I have a lot of distractions, kids running around in the background, cats jumping on my keyboard, neighbors mowing the lawn, whatever it might be, I still have plenty of time to complete it. Otherwise, it will clean up on its own when they're all done. Gives me more. Hey, here's some more information you can learn about this. And our check knowledge, you see, true or false. Azure App Service can automatically scale your web app to meet traffic on demand. Yes, this is true. We couldn't see it. You know what? I've got time. No, I won't go through that. We couldn't see it because this lab didn't, one, walk us through it, and two, didn't allow us. But we could do it once we tell it to. So I'll say yes. Which of the following is not a valid automated deployment resource? If you remember at the prior page, we were talking about the deployment methods. There was both an automated and a manual. And so this is saying which one is not automated. I'm going to glance through here. See, GitHub, I believe, was automated. DevOps was automated. SharePoint? Don't believe SharePoint was. Let's find out. Let's check our answers. Yay, congratulations. And then I say explore other modules. So there we go. That is a walkthrough of our very first lab together of creating a basic web application. I hope you enjoyed it.